kind of hoping the slides wouldn't work so I could tell you that they were pictures of me doing really cool things like on a horse, riding, climbing a mountain. Indeed, we have my slideshow. Three things before we get into this. First of all, can we just give Amy a tremendous round of applause from the bottom of our heart for creating this? Two, I know part of the vision here is to leave Sun Valley, whether it's now or in the future, stronger than it is. I have been so impressed by all the ideas and innovation and commitment that folks have. And we commit to do it, and I hope that others will indeed look at bringing some of their solutions and innovations to benefit the community here. It's beautiful, but there are needs as well, whether it relates to infrastructure, housing, or social services. Finally, I just want to say to all of you, this is a tough time. I mean, we know this. This is a tough time in our country. There's sadness, there's fear. And for me, it's been restorative, it's been fortifying, it's been healthy being with all of you who are so committed to making the world work for more people. So thank you.
Okay.
So we're gonna talk about three things, and I will do it within 15 minutes. I'm asking Amy to give me the throat slashing sign when I'm 2 minutes away. But we're going to talk about three things today. First of all, I just want to empower all of you that you can be the disruptors. You can be national change agents, and indeed, knowing nothing about the industry you may walk into, perhaps you're even best fit to cause the most change because you have no fidelity to the traditional model that might not have worked. There's no better way to learn that is from a lawyer and a teacher who are revolutionizing disaster recovery and house building in America. Two, is my forehead, is it reflecting on my forehead? Am I blinding everyone? If that's, I'm sorry, everyone. I have one pair of sunglasses someone can use. Two, I'll share with you our ethos of constructive discontent, which really took us from the position of having achieved a tremendous amount, really at the top of the game in our industry, and then disrupting ourselves. And then finally, I'll give you an example of an impact-based investment model partnering with the government that we think is really key towards ensuring that in America, disaster recovery is prompt, efficient, and predictable. So 11 years ago and 20 pounds ago, or 11 and a half years ago, I lived in New Orleans. I was a criminal defense lawyer representing poor people accused of crime, teaching at Georgetown Law School. I had exactly the career that I wanted. It's what I always wanted to do. My wife grew up in DC, her family was nearby. We had it, it was good. After a pretty significant case where my client thankfully was both innocent and not guilty, wanted to do anything but engage in another case. So for 2 weeks, we did, first time in our lives, we didn't take a golf trip. We went to New Orleans 6 months after the storm to help, to volunteer. We sent out about 20 or 30 emails saying, we'll come down, we'll do anything that's needed. What can we do to help? And we got one response from a bunch of hippies in St. Bernard Parish who were feeding people. And we thought we got that response because the recovery was over. This is America. Disasters happen. I'll give you a quick stat. 80% of the people in this country live in a community that's been impacted by a federally declared disaster in the last 9 years. So we thought 6 months after the storm, the reason no one responded to us was because it was done. We got there, and you can see from the photos, it was far from done. Houses were on top of cars, cars were on top of houses. But what struck us most was that American citizens who had achieved this basic notion of American success, owning a house, right? That's security. We're taught from when we're young, work hard, buy a house, things can get but so bad. These folks had no path forward and were living in totally untenable situations. Houses, cars, garages, and attics. And so after 2 weeks, we said, we can't just tell these people we've gotten to know awfully well, good luck, have a nice life when there's no path forward. We thought we'll do the American thing, we'll throw money at it. And so we spent 2 weeks interviewing other nonprofit groups and FEMA, trying to learn who's gonna build the houses, when, and would go back to Washington and raise money for them. We got an answer. It was like they were Rosie Greer reading from the United Way cards 25 years ago, and they all said the same thing. They said, we've done disaster recovery the same way for the last 30 years. Why would we change? Building is the third phase of recovery. So we told them to go pound sand and move to New Orleans. We had great success. Some of you may have seen my wife. She was the CNN Hero of the Year in 2008. By year one, we had rebuilt 88 houses where the local FEMA-endorsed organization had allocated funding for 13. That doesn't mean built, had allocated funding for 13. We were on the cover of U.S. News and World Report. Within 4 years, we were easily pumping out with volunteers and AmeriCorps members over 100 houses a year. But then we, thanks. But then we plateaued. We didn't get any better. You know, it was year 5, and we did year 4 and year 5 more or less the same things. And it was at that point that we were fortunate enough to spend some time with Toyota. And to be sure, they gave us a bunch of money, but the best thing that they did, and I encourage all the corporations in the building to do this, is not just invest dollars, but indeed invest cents. And so Toyota taught us the Toyota production system. Some folks call it lean, some folks call it Six Sigma. We think TPS is right because it includes culture. And within 9 months, we had reduced our construction time, which was industry best, by 48%. So we went from 121 days per house to 61 days per house. And that, you know what that means? That meant more people were coming home for less money. And we spread. We went from hyper-local and one intervention to national. We opened an office in Joplin, Missouri in a year and a half, built 181 houses in New York, Staten Island, New Jersey, and we're still pumping out a bunch of houses. And it was then where these series of inner dialogues occurred. And because we had this foundation of what we call constructive discontent, we looked inward and we realized we weren't really doing the right thing. So let me explain constructive discontent really quickly. If you're happy with results, there's only one thing you can do. It's do exactly the same thing. But if you're dissatisfied with results, you've got to be willing to change, and you've got to be willing to do things differently. And you can't intelligently do things differently if you don't talk about problems. And so rather than merely practice the tenets of TPS, we realized that this had to be our ethos and our culture, our lens to see the world. Frederick Douglass says, where there is no struggle, there is no progress. Our clients in these communities across the country impacted by disaster needed progress, so we had to be willing to struggle. The best way we could do that is by embracing this ethos of constructive discontent, which has 2 parts. One, to be hearable. All of us have assassinated a good message with a crummy delivery, and maybe we get a reprisal from doing that at home. But in the people-serving world, if we assassinate a virtuous or effective message with a crummy delivery, we're hurting our clients. And second, the Frederick Douglass notion, we have to be discontent. And so we turned that inwards. First of all, at a board meeting, I got set up by one of our board members, who was the president of UPS. He said, Zach, compared to, I won't fill in the other group in New York, how many houses have we built? And I just fell into his trap. I didn't literally pound my chest, but it was more or less the same thing. I said, Jerry, we've done 3 times as many houses as this other group. And he said, Zach, I want you to think about why that's a good thing, and if that's really a good thing. And so we went through this internal strategic visioning process, and we surveyed our staff, we surveyed our board members, we surveyed our clients. And what we understood is that SBP didn't launch because we were housing people. We launched because we realized that people had a breaking point, that citizens have a breaking point. And after disaster, there's a sort of mathematical formula that predicts when someone will get to that breaking point. And a breaking point can mean different things. Those of you who live in or have spent times in communities that have been impacted by disaster, for some it's mortality. People die. Look at any community where disasters happen, look at the obituaries, you have 30, 40, 50-year-old people dying fast. Others, they'll just never be the same. And whether it's seniors in their golden years, parents who are raising kids, or kids during their time-limited formative years, there is a breaking point. And we realized this function of getting to breaking point it's mathematical. There's disaster, plus time from disaster, plus the amount of predictability someone has. If there's more predictability, the breaking point's farther down the road. If there's less predictability, it's closer. And amount of resilience people have, and that's when folks get to their breaking point. So we left the mission of rebuilding homes for disaster survivors and took on the mandate of fortifying people against their breaking point. And what that means is our mission now is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. No longer were we committed and comfortable merely building houses, but indeed we had to get to the root cause. So here are the 5 interventions that we have. First of all, we build in an innovative way, always getting better. Recently, we started panelized construction. That allows us to prefabricate walls in a morning and erect them by the end of the afternoon. Second, we share. At dinner last night, a bunch of our table mates were bemoaning the fact that in the nonprofit world, there's both redundancy and there's proprietariness. At SBP, Toyota has the word yokoten, and it means if you do it well, share it. And we thought if Toyota could work with other auto manufacturers and share what they do well, in the people-serving world, we certainly had to do the same thing. So we train other organizations our trade secrets, how to build houses faster, our organizational culture. We give other organizations our grant applications, our database, our CRM, and all of our construction materials. We work with Habitats, Rebuilding Together, and other organizations that are started right after disaster. That's a direct answer to Jerry's question of why would it be a good thing if you build more houses than everyone else? And if you're shrinking the time between disaster and recovery, don't you need more groups doing the work? Third, we do preparedness or resilience work. Before and after disaster, we train homeowners, small and mid-sized businesses, and we got to 10,000 last year, how to understand and mitigate risk, and then after disaster, what do they need to know to avoid the common barriers to a prompt, efficient, and predictable recovery. Third, we advise and innovate by working with local governments. I'll give you an example in just a moment. Federal government has the most money. Federal government money at some point transitions to the states. The state then gets the money on the ground. Traditionally, that's a 24 to 36 month period. We realized that if really what success is reducing the time between disaster and recovery, we had to go upstream and educate mayors, governors, and city council people how to best interact with HUD and how to get the dollars on the ground. We had one quick victory. Working with Governor Haley in South Carolina, we got money on the ground in month 13 when they had predicted it to come in month 23. And finally, we're advocating within the industry, both with institutional actors, FEMA and the Red Cross, and other organizations to measure what matters and destroy this notion of fidelity to process. In other words, if you measure process, you're going to have a pristine process. We've done it the same way for 30 years. And instead declare very clear outcomes at the beginning of disaster that will dictate the strategy after. I'll give you one example of a recent intervention, and that's a bridge loan program that we recently launched in Baton Rouge. Some of you may know that in August of last year, there was 1,000-year rain. There were in fact 4,000-year rains in the United States last year that flooded over 140,000 homes. 60% of these homes, for anyone who's interested, it's actually more than that, were not in a mandatory flood insurance community. So many people didn't have flood insurance because the government told them they didn't have to. It was predicted that the federal dollars would reach the ground somewhere between month 16 to month 24. So we partnered with HUD, we partnered with the state, and we had a funding partner. And what we worked out is, and this is a charitable funding partner, a bridge loan program where SBP raised money. We loaned it to the clients, people who would clearly fit into the state and HUD's eventual funding program. We fronted them the money. They used that money to work with us or other nonprofit groups and sometimes some for-profit contractors to build their houses. That started in month 7. The benefits of that were tremendous. First of all, fewer people reached the breaking point. Second, the homes were less expensive to build because they didn't sit and linger longer. And third, the community got both its tax base and its people back. The bridge loan program still has not, or the CDBG program still has not launched. So any houses that we started in month 7 would still be sitting. When it does launch, we worked out with HUD, 2 minutes, thank you, and the state that the citizens will get reimbursed and that money will come back to SBP. We are piloting this in Louisiana. We believe it's a model that eventually we'll be able to take to impact philanthropy, and eventually it will be a model that can go to private finance once we get the recapture rate right. When we get it there, though, to be super clear, this is not something that SBP wants to have as proprietary. We think that this is a model that we're just the first in, and we want this to take over the model. I believe I have a minute left, and I'm going to cede that to whoever's next. Thank you for your time.